Hello and welcome to our webinar, Employee-Initiated and Company-Initiated Mobility, presented by Weichert Workforce Mobility. Today in our latest webinar, we're going to be talking about, as you might have guessed from the title card, employee-initiated moves and company-initiated moves. Typically, when you think about relocation, you think of a company asking, or in some cases telling an employee to move from one location to another. But there are also instances in which employees raise their hands and say, I'd like to be relocated here, or I'd like to take an assignment here. Particularly in today's work from anywhere world, we're starting to see more of this. And to discuss this phenomena, we have with us Jennifer Connell. Jennifer is the Vice President of Advisory Services here at Weichert Workforce Mobility, and she has been conducting research extensively, putting together facts and figures that we'll be discussing today. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Excellent.
Great to be here, Tim. Thanks.
Excellent. Diving right into it, again, when I think about relocation, I think of a company saying, you know, the boss calls you into the office and says, hey, we're going to send you on an assignment here. We're going to ask you to take an assignment here, to build some skills, to become a stronger leader, to gain practical skills in a different business environment. What do you see as some of the trends? Well, first of all, are you starting to see more employee hand raisers, I guess we call them these days, more employees asking to be relocated?
Absolutely. And we've been seeing this trend going on for a long time, even before the pandemic. It's a highly motivated workforce. Those folks who raise their hand and they want to go to another location around the world. We certainly saw an increase during the pandemic for people who wanted to work remotely in another location because they didn't necessarily have to be in the office. So it certainly opened up more locations, certainly when they could be anywhere. But there's a lot of trends that are influencing the workforce in general, which is also giving them more opportunities, and certainly that remote aspect. And that remote and hybrid workforce has resulted in a far more elastic workforce. And by elastic, it's opening up more locations, and it's resulting in a more elastic aspect regarding how people are looking at their own career. They might not be looking at necessarily the same role in that same job where they might go from accountant 1 to accountant 2 over the course of their lifetime. They might take on different jobs, different roles within the organization, different organizations, even different industries over the course of their lifetime. Another trend we're looking at is employees are certainly looking to their employers to build those skills that are going to build their resume throughout their career. So employers are responding to that by building those skills. They're looking at more skills-based workforce, not just looking at the roles themselves. They're also looking at the shifting demographics among those early workforce as a way to reinforce this cohort as a highly mobile population. We've talked for years about how the early workforce, they have the most freedom to be able to pick up their bags and be able to move anywhere, right? I mean, you think about when you were probably a young lad and you were early in your career, and
those records are sealed.
Those are the ones that companies look at, and they say, they're the ones leading the way, that the path to be able to take on those opportunities to be able to move to another location. And they're the ones that we kind of see as the ones raising their hands. They're those employee initiated moves, most mobile, and probably going to continue to be the ones raising their hands. They're certainly ones that when I speak to clients, they're the cohort that we're looking at, but not necessarily all of the time.
Okay.
Another trend that's influencing the way employees are looking at the workforce and the way companies are responding to it is that cooling of the war for talent. We're starting to see companies that are right-sizing their workforce. Is that having an influence on employees, whether they're going to raise their hands for employee-initiated moves? Is that going to change? Is that going to start to reduce in numbers, or is that going to increase? And then employers are still going to require mobility to develop leadership and support growth. So we're not going to see that lessen anytime in the future. So if employees are going to raise their hand, again, they're highly motivated workforce. If they are going to raise their hand, employers should pay attention to those folks. They're saying, we want to stay with the company. Don't ignore them. Is there an opportunity to find a role for them in that location if they want to go there? And then finally, organizational priorities will shape mobility patterns. And in a nutshell, that means if an organization has a specific project in a location and somebody raises their hand and wants to go there, they're going to find a mobility program for them in that location. So it might be a short-term assignment. They're going to be looking at more specific programs around rotational programs or developmental programs, very specific, unique programs around that type of project or need in that location. So,
do employees have, and do employees, are they risking anything by raising their hands? I mean, if someone puts the seed in their the company's head that they want to move, does that then could are there some instances where employees may want to relocate but they're afraid to raise the hand because they'll think, oh, they don't think I'm happy here? And is there a way that a company could overcome that or make it more welcoming to those employees who may want to move, to make them feel comfortable raising their hands?
That's a great question. I mean, especially nowadays where companies are, I like to use the phrase, right-sizing their organization. Is an employee sticking their neck out by, you know, raising their hand and saying, I'd like to take a relocation, or can I go to this other office? Can I go to Paris to work?
Right.
If there's an opportunity there. And it's not necessarily marked for relocation. However, for large organizations that are able to share that talent and be able to have a skills-based culture, if you will, where managers have great communication and can be able to look at each other's talent as a way to borrow from each other, and employees can be able to look to other business units and should feel free to look to other locations and not be afraid to raise their hands and explore other offices.
When we talk about hand raises, if you will, the employees who want to move, who request to move, who are these people? Is there a certain, you know, how are they typically classified? What marks a hand raiser in most organizations?
Sure. Well, there's a few things that they need to consider. So you know, on the positive side, hand raisers, I like to think they're typically the most motivated. In an ideal situation, they are looking for professional opportunities. They want to stay with the company. They're dedicated. They have said, I really like this company. I like the values. Their values align with my own. I see myself being with them for a long time. And they're motivated by not only those professional opportunities, but also personal opportunities. Perhaps they want to go to the other location because they want to live in that location. Perhaps it provides them opportunities from, you know, a volunteer perspective. They want to do some good in that community, or you know, they want to live in that location because it aligns with the values align with their own. Maybe they like it's a more scenic area, or the hobbies that they want to pursue are there. That's, you know, maybe
you can root for the Red Sox if you move here.
Exactly.
You know, that's something that they might, you know, factor in.
Yeah, I see your priorities. Okay. In other things is, you know, it might result in for the company, it might be result in a faster, more efficient move process because that person is more motivated, right?
Right.
So if they're motivated, that means they can kind of get them through the process faster because they don't have to, you know, necessarily provide them as many benefits, and there's less decision making that has to happen. So again, fewer benefits means that they might be, some of their motivating factors is they might be following a spouse or partner as a result of it. So maybe they want to take that move to Boston. It might not be
just throwing it out there.
It might not have anything to do with the Red Sox. Maybe it's because their spouse or partner is taking a job in that location. So they don't need as many benefits because their spouse or partner is already getting a set of relocation benefits.
Absolutely.
But you have to be very careful. If they're moving to another country, they have to comply with those visa and immigration regulations. So the company has to be very careful of how they're going to get them there.
Any other considerations that I know we've got some stats on the screen right now that you can feel free to read. We won't cover those stats in great detail, but I will ask you, what are some of the primary considerations when a company is going to allow people to work remotely?
Yes, and we'll get into some of the benefits because that's often what we're asked in advisory services. What are the typical benefits? And that really can range. And we're going to also talk about some of the questions that a company should be asking themselves when they start to develop this type of a program, or or even when they do this on a one-off basis for an employee. But when you're looking at the considerations, the remote work and even if you're looking at a work from anywhere, which we're starting to see companies get away from that concept a little bit, the last few years, it's really brought on such a unique perspective on how employees really want to work in the future. And I think that we're starting to see organizations kind of button that down a bit. Because organizations were allowing this remote work, they're being very generous in this respect, because employees were saying, I can't stay with the company unless I can work from anywhere I want, because they were really trying to bring talent in from every direction as much as they could. Because we've seen the pendulum swing in the other direction, that right to work from anywhere has really turned from kind of a right to more of a privilege in the employer's direction. We have seen companies take the stance of those hand raisers, they'll provide them those compliance related benefits and logistical benefits to more of those, and maybe a few additional benefits, as well as some nice to haves. But the rest of it is more or less on the employee. But it really depends on the nature of the request and what the employee and the employer are trying to do.
All right, so now we're moving on. What we're seeing on the screen right now are some of the benefits that companies would be offering for employee-initiated moves and employer-initiated moves. Can you talk a little bit about these?
Yeah, and this is just a high-level overview of generally of how companies view employee-initiated moves versus employer-initiated moves. I think the key difference and takeaway for me is that regardless of how you view it, is right there in the middle. Regardless of what you want to provide, is looking at that basic safety and compliance under the employee-initiated moves. You always want to make sure that you're taking care of the employee. So even though you're not necessarily going to provide those perks and incentives or ongoing benefits for an employee-initiated move, just because they raise their hand, you absolutely want to look out for the duty of care for them. Yes. Is make sure that those compliance-related benefits are provided to them. Because even though that they raise their hand, it is still the employer's responsibility to make sure that they're safe when they're in that location, that their basic needs are met.
Absolutely, and it's interesting as we hit this slide, someone asked a question. We are fielding questions as they come in. Again, use the chat feature, but someone was calling attention to the bullet in which you state that the employee bears some expense and burden for the employee-initiated move. The question was, what types of expenses would an employee who raises their hand be responsible for? So can you talk a little bit about that last bullet under policy focus on the employee-initiated side?
Actually, if you want to go to the next slide, I put up here a very general sample framework of the types of benefits that you would see, and this is for an international program, for somebody who raises their hand versus an employer-driven program. And as you can see, there are very few check marks on the employee-initiated side. And this is something that would be very highly customized, something that I would work with a client on to develop. As you can see here, it's just the compliance related benefits that are checked off here, the immigration tax support. Something that an employee might be responsible for themselves would be those items that are, the appliance allowance, for example. Even the household goods is checked off. However, to be realistic, some of these things I would normally recommend that maybe might be a shared responsibility. The household goods, I would see a company and providing some sort of benefit but perhaps the employee themselves might also be able to add on themselves as well. In this particular case, for the ones that are itemized as optional, for this particular client, these were flexible benefits that they were allowed to choose from. So,
understood. Hopefully that answered the question. Thank you for addressing that. Now we're going to talk a little bit about whether you would want to build an employee or employer initiated framework. And as the slide spells it out right there, some of the questions you want to ask.
Sure. So when I'm working with a client, there's a lot of considerations, particularly now with the whole remote and hybrid workforce aspect. And work structure within organizations, because I think the vast majority of organizations have sort of landed on this hybrid workplace structure where companies are requiring employees to go into the office 2 to 3 days a week. So with that, it brings a kind of a new flavor to how companies are viewing these hand raisers. Some of the questions that they might ask are, on the employee side, is that candidate or employee who is raising their hand, do they present a talent retention risk if they leave, if they say no to them, if they don't give them that mobility opportunity? And does the candidate fill an existing position? Is this opportunity, when they raise their hand, is this going to give them the skills to broaden a broader group of future leadership? Is this going to help them to fuel their succession plan? And does the move or assignment they're raising their hand for support their own personal objectives? Does this opportunity promote career development for them? Does having a separate mobility program for those volunteer opportunities or those hand raisers, does it promote our corporate culture? Does it align with our own values? Will having a program around these hand raisers attract key talent? Will this make a difference and help us stand out against the competition? And some of the things that I like to put out there is when you're developing this type of a program or considering having a completely separate program around hand raisers, and I'm seeing more companies do this, is think about next steps, think about conducting a voice of the customer, getting more feedback internally. Go out to your key stakeholders and find out from them, will this help us in the future? Go beyond your service evaluations to determine, is this something that will help us and help you to drive your business goals? Do an analysis of your recent exceptions. Find out if there were, in your exception history, if there were some key benefits that would have made a difference to those hand raisers. Did you lose anybody, and were there certain folks out there that were asking for certain benefits that were raising their hands? Do some cost projections, some cost modeling to determine what would this cost you? What would the budget need to be for something like this? And then also do some decision models as well. What would it look like? What would the process be? I predict that having this would actually be a more efficient way to bring these people through the process in mobility and help to facilitate these decisions down the road.
Excellent.
And now we'd like to invite all of you to participate in our latest survey, which focuses on employee-initiated moves. You can take the survey by scanning the QR code you see on the screen or by visiting the URL you see. Everyone who participates will receive a first look advance copy of our survey results. We thank you very much in advance for your participation.